Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. My name is Hel and I'm the vocalist of Ukrainian metal band Ignia. Today I'd like to speak about Patron for artists and give you some tips that can improve your use of this platform, or maybe based on this video you will be able to decide for yourself if this platform is for you. I launched my Patreon page back in December 2018, which will make about 2 years at the end of 2020 of me running this page. I grew from 0 patrons to over 200 patrons that are supporting me and my band on a monthly basis. You might think that this number is not huge, and I agree with that. However, through Patreon we managed to raise funds to record our full-length album, shoot 2 official music videos, upgrade some our music equipment, tour, and do a lot of more stuff. Surprisingly for me, there are not so many bands, especially metal bands, who are using Patreon. At the same time, every day I get tons of questions about this platform, how to use it, what tiers to choose, what to post there, what is my experience with Patreon, and blah blah blah. I guess that right now the question of Patreon is more relevant than ever, because during this time of pandemic, touring is nearly impossible for many bands. Many artists lost their income streams and they're sitting at home. They want to connect to their audience. They want to, compensate the funds that they lost because of this pandemic. They want to continue recording and releasing their music. One of the most common and hardest questions that I get asked is, should I start a Patreon page? I personally believe that the best thing that you can do is sit down, ask yourself the following questions and honestly reply to them. Why do I need Patreon? How often will I be able to post there? What am I going to post there? Who is my audience? What value can I give them through Patreon? Are they going to support me? What is the goal that I'd like to achieve through this platform? And many, many more. What I really recommend is take your time. Don't rush it with Patreon. Study what Patreon offers and what features it has. Check out what other similar artists in your genre are doing on Patreon, how they are utilizing this platform, what they offer, what they're posting. Think how much time and efforts you are willing to spend. Make a plan, make a short-term and long-term strategy for your Patreon. Without planning, you can be easily disappointed and you can, waste your time that you could have spent on something that is more valuable for you as an artist. What to post? Now, this is where you have to be creative. You have to know your audience and understand what you can give them through Patreon, how you can be entertaining, interesting, informative, valuable, what you can give them in return for their support. In our case, 50% of the content that I publish on Patreon consists of my personal creations and 50% is dedicated to the band. Time to time, I'm publishing my poems. I do live streams where I just sit, sing and play my guitar. I do podcasts, I do video vlogs. Sometimes I record song covers for the top tier patrons or send them some physical gifts as signed posters, whatever. When it comes to Ignia, my band, we do tour vlogs, a lot of backstage stuff, unreleased demos, instrumental versions of our songs, playbacks that we use when we play live. We provide early access to our releases. We give our patrons discounts to our merch store. There are a lot of things that we're doing out there. So I really take it very seriously and I always plan it ahead of time. I consider Patreon as my part-time job. For example, at the beginning of June, I already had a plan of what I'm going to post there until the end of summer, and I'm posting every week. It works really differently for all creators and for all artists, because I also know artists that are releasing one thing a month, and they also have patrons who are supporting them, and it's just their speed, it's their pace, it's their schedule. There's nothing wrong about it. So when it comes to understanding what to post on Patreon, all you need is your imagination and your audience. Don't forget to ask your audience what they want. You can use polls, you can use Google Forms, you can post something on Facebook and ask them if they're interested in Patreon and joining it and supporting you. So talk to them. How often should you post on Patreon? Again, there is no secret formula. When I launched Patreon, I used to post like 1-2 times a month. However, right at the beginning, I set myself a goal saying that once I reach 50 patrons, which happened very fast, I would post every week. So since then, and it's been more than 1.5 years, I've been posting literally every week. There is a great tool of scheduling your posts. So for example, if you're on tour, you can simply prepare your content in advance. And you also have to understand that Patreon is not only about posting. I mean, you also have different tiers with different benefits for your patrons. So sometimes it's not about posting, but rather sending some physical stuff, or maybe doing live streams, or having a Skype call with your top tier patrons, or something else. So you need to take everything into account. And we logically come to a question: how many tiers and what tiers you should make on Patreon. I can say that again, it works very differently for everyone, and I know artists that have just one tier that is simply an access to their Patreon feed. I know artists that have 10 tiers and they tend to include like their services, so to say, or collaboration rates to their patrons. So for example, if there's a vocalist and this vocalist has some fee for recording vocals for another band, he or she can simply make a tier of, let's say, $500 and offer this service through Patreon. Patreon itself recommends making 3 to 5 tiers for your patrons to choose from. With my Patreon, I have 6 tiers from $2 to $50 per month. And they are very different, but for example, my Patreon feed is available to all tiers starting from $2. The top tier patrons, like $30 and $50 per month, they have access to some more time-consuming tasks and more personal approach. You also have to understand that everybody has different financial situations, so sometimes Patreon can support you a lot, sometimes they decrease their level. Everything is very flexible. You can launch your Patreon with some tiers and then change it through time. Just don't forget to communicate this change to your patrons. And actually, it can also bring some life to your existing Patreons. So if you're seeing that you're stuck or that it's not developing, think about changing your tier system and maybe launch a special offer together with this tier. Again, what I want to emphasize on is don't offer the benefits that you won't be able to fulfill, because it will be very disappointing for yourself and for your patrons. Another question is Patreon for you? Patreon can be beneficial to a lot of artists, including independent bands like Ignea, my band, or for bands that are signed to labels. So for example, there's a band Winter Sun, and they are signed to Nuclear Blast and they still have a Patreon. There are also a lot of examples of band members that are launching their personal Patreon pages. So what comes to my mind is the vocalist of Arch Enemy, Elisa Whiteglass, the vocalist of Delane, Charlotte Vessels. I saw that the vocalist of The Agonist has also recently launched her Patreon. We all know that musicians are very creative by their nature, and usually they not only sing or play instruments or compose music, but they also do some other kinds of art. A lot of musicians paint, write, do some handmade stuff, and a lot of other things. And all these things can be monetized through Patreon. So what I'm trying to say is, don't be afraid to launch Patreon and use this tool for your benefit and for the benefit of your patrons, because believe me, they really want to see your backstage stuff and be closer to you. Be smart about it. Know your audience and don't try to sell something that this audience is not interested in. Later on, I am planning to make more videos about how to use Patreon for artists, how to improve your current Patreon page and grow the number of your patrons, how to make it beneficial for you and for your fans. I will also share more practical tips with you on how to manage your Patreon page more efficiently. I will give you a glimpse into what I'm doing with my Patreon, and also I will be talking to other DIY artists, mostly from the metal scene, and talk to them how they made an advantage of Patreon and what their experience is. If you are a band or an artist, you can also put the link to your Patreon in the comments, because I'll be very interested in seeing more artists, and especially more metal artists and bands who are running Patreon. Even though I started my Patreon page almost 2 years ago and I can consider myself somewhat experienced Patreon creator, I'm always very interested to see what other creators are doing. Finally, I'd like to give you a small spark of inspiration and some kind of home assignment. Go and check the page of Amanda Palmer. It is the magnificent artist who has right now about 15,000 patrons, which is very, very impressive, and she was one of the first to launch a Patreon page. And you can also check out her book that is called The Art of Asking. It's a very inspirational and very informative book to read if the topics of Patreon and crowdfunding and engaging with your fan base is something that you're interested in. If you have some specific questions about Patreon, simply leave them down in the comments below. If you like this video, then please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who you think will take advantage of watching this video. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel, because there is a lot coming up soon.